I absolutely think we're in that tightening, hardening market. I think the days of the employers who are, let's call them average risk, seeing single digit rate increases, that's gone.
Yeah.
It's going to be a double digit rate increase market going forward.
Thanks for tuning in to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Let's go make healthcare better together.
One of the coolest insurance underwriting stories I've ever heard was the Oreo. So Oreo, when they had some big anniversary, you opened up a package and it was like Willy Wonka. You got a golden ticket to their event.
Okay.
At that event, Oreos are not perfect. They're not perfectly formed. So they did an Oreo stacking contest, and they wanted to say, hey, we want to do $1 million payout or $100,000 payout if anybody can stack over a certain thing. So we had a bunch of underwriters go buy boxes of Oreos and just sit there and stack Oreos all day. And I think the highest number anybody got to was like 27. So we set the number at 30.
Okay.
And
did anybody exceed 30?
Nope, because you had to have the golden ticket and you had to come in there and do the stacking of that day during the event. And then, again, so we wrote them an insurance product, but they got to promote it.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, you can.
So do you think it's conceivable that somebody could stack 30? I mean, have we ever tried? There's got to be a Guinness Book of World Records for this.
Oh, I'm sure somebody can do it, but you got to do it in the time, and you got to be one of these winners too.
Well, on that notion, I remember as a kid, obviously, Hot Wheels, right? Hot Wheels cars. Yeah. So Hot Wheels had this promotion where you would buy a car in a package and you wouldn't know what car you're getting. But if it dissolved and there was a golden Hot Wheels emblem in this package of the car, you won a free bicycle. And I actually got one of those, and they mailed me a Hot Wheels bicycle when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I had the only Hot Wheels BMX bike in the neighborhood. And of course, I think I wrecked it or something. I ended up messing it up. But as a kid, I was like, I didn't know people actually won these contests. I thought they were all fake. And lo and behold, I was the winner of a golden Hot Wheel emblem.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. I figure we're starting, right? Yeah. So maybe we'll get the Oreo and the Hot Wheel story as the kickoff for this, Jay. Well, so Jay, super thrilled about this, man. And then finally an opportunity to dig into stop loss insurance, which I nerd about. But Jay, why don't you...
that makes two of us.
It makes two of us. And we nerd about heavy metal too, which is even cooler. Yeah. So why don't we introduce yourself, if you don't mind? Tell us who you are, what you do, and who you work for.
Jay Ritchie. I'm the president and CEO of Tokio Marine HCC A&H Group. Okay. We're a large stop loss underwriter, been in the business for a little bit over 40 years. I am currently in my 29th year with Tokio Marine HCC or some iteration of it. I've been through a lot of acquisitions, been on the acquiring side probably 17 times. I've been acquired twice.
Okay.
So been in the business a long time, but total career is about 32 years in.
Any plans for the 30th anniversary of a celebration of some kind then?
Probably not.
Okay.
It's a milestone, but if somebody else is coordinating that, they'll coordinate it. But yeah, for me, that's not what I want to do.
Fair.
I'm not a spotlight guy, so.
Well, here at least you're on the show today, and we'll shine a little light on you.
Well,
man.
I appreciate that, and hopefully I can hold up to standards.
You will, man. You will. And so, Jay, I would love to get a little bit of your story before we dig into stop loss. And I know we're going to cover past, present, and future state of stop loss and what's happening in the market. And that was a big impetus for you to come down. Yep. But you just mentioned a 32-year career, so I'd love to go back in time and hear a little about your story.
Yeah, I am one of those rare people who I joined the industry when I was 21. Okay. I was still a full-time student in college. I originally joined a company called Accordia of the South, which was a unique entity in that we were underwriters for Anthem.
Okay.
But we were a TPA, a brokerage, and an underwriter. So we were owned by the Associated Group, which is based in Indianapolis, and they eventually owned the entity that became Anthem, and also named Accordia, which is now, I think, was part of Wells Fargo and has now been acquired several times in the brokerage roll-ups.
And you were one of those guys that actually studied risk, which every once in a while I get somebody on the show that actually intentionally got into this business.
I originally wanted to be an actuary, realized I probably wasn't smart enough to be an actuary, or I didn't want to do all the math. Went into underwriting, but yes, I have a undergraduate from Georgia State in risk management insurance, and I have a master's of science in risk management insurance. So I am one of the few people who got into the insurance industry intentionally.
Yeah, and so you obviously, even if you didn't get to the level of being an actuary, I'm the same as you. I've always had a financial inclination. Yep. I love numbers. You went, what, Calc 4, I think you said, in college?
I went all the way through Calc 4.
I see. I stopped
I struggled with it. And again, that's where Dr. Batten at Georgia State at the time said, hey, I really want you to get an A in Calc 4. And I was kind of like, well, it looks like I'm going to be an underwriter.
Yeah. Well, that's when there was a time where very briefly I entertained the notion of becoming an actuary.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting. I was a financial analyst at a brokerage at that time, and I love numbers. That's where I learned stop loss. And I go, yeah, that sounds kind of interesting to really get deep in the weeds in theory and things like that. Then I realized the number of tests and how much time you had to study. And it took me all of about 20 minutes to go, that's not your path. Let's focus on sales instead.
And I agree with you. The path that these actuaries take to be a full FSA, it's brutal. I mean, it's a lot of study time. It's a lot of everything. And, it's like, when it makes CPA testing look a little bit easier, and I'm not saying a CPA test is easy in any way, but yeah, when I always tell people, it's like, yeah, imagine like 10 CPA tests. That's what you got to do.
Yeah,
they were very protective of making sure there's not a lot of actuaries.
Fair enough, yeah, because the standard needs to be really high, and I totally get that. It's an honor to have achieved that status or that accreditation. But I got invited recently to talk about captives and stop loss at an actuarial conference, and I'm going, what am I doing here? I'm talking to people that probably are way smarter than me, but then I actually discovered they were interested in captives. They were interested in positioning of it. They were asking questions as a follow-up, and I go, okay, now it makes sense why they want to hear about this stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're a smart group of people, but they're very curious. And again, I work with a ton of actuaries. Our CEO of our holding company is an actuary by trade, and she is probably one of the smartest people I've ever run into. They're just really smart people. With that said, though, you don't have to be an actuary to be a smart person.
True.
We've got a lot of smart people in the stop loss business. We've got a lot of people within Tokio Marine HCC and even our competitors. We see it all over. This is a highly specialized business. And I would tell you, my 32 career years, it's been a highly rewarding career. I advocate for a lot of young people coming into the business of going, this is a good business to get into.
Yeah.
We're not going anywhere. I know insurance isn't sexy, but when I look at it, I was like, there are so many opportunities. It's a wide batch of different types of products, and you just pick where you want to be. So we've solicited, RMI graduates within the industry because it's easier to go to a kid who's studying risk management insurance and easier to sell them on going into the insurance industry than it is to go to a bunch of finance kids and go, hey, who wants to be in insurance?
But I think especially with this product, and I would agree with you on your assessment of like there are nearly infinite paths in the world of insurance. Absolutely. But you have an idea in your mind of what insurance is, and you think of life insurance that you're selling your grandma or grandpa, or you're going to your network as a young guy or a gal trying to convince them to buy that. That's the reality, is that couldn't be farther away from what we do. And so it wasn't until I discovered the notion of stop loss and self-funding that I go, oh, this is what I want to do. This is my thing.
We are more like investment banking of the insurance industry. There's a lot of complicated stuff on it. And I think you and I have had this conversation where we talk about stop loss itself is not that difficult of a product. But the risk that it covers is the U.S. health system. You probably can't get a more complicated risk profile. So again, easy insurance product, very difficult risk overall that you're trying to cover. And knowing all the nuances of what's going on in that risk and understanding, what's happening on the pharma side now, what's happening on the hospital side, what's happening just in normal care delivery. You've got to know all of that stuff to really be good at the business.
Well, it'd really be good, not to mention, we were discussing this over coffee, you're effectively at the end of the line, right? In that transaction chain, yet you're taking all the risk of the very large stuff at the end of the line.
Right.
So I think you were saying you have a really interesting vantage point. You can see it all coming, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with the stop loss or the reinsurer having to pay for that risk.
Yeah, and we always talk about that. If there's this long line from all the way from the member who's getting covered all the way through all the vendors through the process, we sit at the very end of that line. And it's easy to stay at the end of the line and see where it curves, see where somebody got out of line, to see all that. So we always see the 2% that goes wrong, not the 98% that goes right. That's the nature of what our business is. And so we're always looking at, oh, that could have happened here, that could have happened here. And I think you've got to have the right mindset of going, nobody meant to mess something up. It just got messed up.
Yeah.
Something happened. That's the risk business. Welcome to it. I think I had a great mentor in this business, Mike Shell, who he was kind of like, we're in the risk business for a reason. If you want no risk, you're in the wrong business.
Absolutely.
And again, he was just monumental in my career. He was president of Tokio Marine HCC. He just retired earlier this year, but he's one of the better insurance minds I've ever met. But he very much taught you risk is okay. That's why we're here. And again, I would say even in the stop loss business, everybody's kind of like, well, we don't want claims. Well, actually we do.
Yeah.
Without claims, you don't have a business. Our job is to manage claims. We are the financial backstop. We are the source that makes the employer actually able to go and self-fund and take a little more risk, be a little more control of their plan, get more data, do more with their plan, and be more creative, knowing that they've got a financial backstop that their risk caps at a certain point. That's a valuable part of the industry. So I still think we're very critical to what goes on with employers and how they deliver health care.
Well, not
benefits.
to mention, you mentioned as a career, and I'm sure we'll get into like more of the progression of your career, but this is a business that is resilient against the ebbs and flows in the economy. Yep. You were even saying perhaps when the economy does do worse, that actually either stay steady or might actually improve the stop loss business. So the reality is I foresee it as a very predictable career path to go down, as long as you're willing to dig in and learn it. And I advocate all the time for young people to consider, as weird as we might seem to most average people, this is a really interesting and fulfilling career path, in my opinion.
And I think it really is. I think, again, insurance is not considered sexy, but what we do is more of like a financial reinsurance. It's more of like, maybe not the investment banking side, but it's something you got to dig in, you got to understand. And it can be very rewarding for that. I also say is that for the younger generations right now, this is just such a robust industry, because the boomers they're half retired and they're getting close. They've got maybe shorter runways. The Gen Xers like myself, we did adopt into the insurance industry, and we're all kind of at the heights of our careers and doing what we're supposed to be doing. But then when you look at the millennials, that generation really didn't attract to the insurance business. So now you've got the Gen Z sitting behind it going, if I learn this business and I get in, and we've got a lot of good young staff in our organization, that they're learning the business. But as the Gen X kind of moves on, there's this huge gap where the millennials didn't adopt, and
I've
there's
seen
huge
it in the
promotion
Gen Z.
opportunities, huge opportunities within the organizations and within the industry.
I've seen it firsthand, the Gen Z interest in what we do. And to my organization's credit, the recruiting directly out of school of associate program we've built there's like 3 tracks, or underwriting, sales, and service. The level of intelligence of people that we're attracting is off the charts. And I often talk to these 22, 23-year-olds and go, you don't know how lucky you are to already be started in this industry at 23. You literally, the sky is the limit for your career if you decide to continue to go down this path. But I did observe
I'm the guy who started at 21, well before most people were doing it, before I graduated with an undergraduate degree. And it's been hugely rewarding for me. I also think what's been also rewarding on that is going, don't be afraid to put your ladder on a different wall, meaning that, every 3 to 5 years, you should be learning more. The worst thing you can do is just go, well, I'm going to do this role and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this until, I'm 50 years old. Nope. What's the next challenge? What else can I learn? That's where you get real reward in this industry.
Totally.
Because again, I'm an underwriter by trade, but I took a different path within our organization because I said, I'm willing to try something new. I'm willing to go maybe see what happens on an operations side, or I'm willing to go start up a legal compliance area with a guy I hired who really knew what he was doing. And I was the guy who kind of goes, well, let's see how we balance this. And it was really some great challenges that have made me very robust and been a great career for me.
Chronic health issues, surprise out-of-network medical bills, inflated medical and prescription drug prices. These issues cost self-insured employers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Add to this the rising cost of care and potential for waste across the life of a claim, and it's clear that self-insured employers need innovative solutions that lower their health plan spend. At Valence, we've done just that, developed innovation that shifts the current paradigm. A complete and integrated ecosystem solution driven by data, one that manages and simplifies the complexity of medical claim costs. It is through analyzing millions of data points that we enable employers to realize and fuel cost-saving solutions. Valence experts come prepared from day one, targeting the fraction of claims that will drive the majority of health plan costs. That is how our team lives the Valence promise, engaging early and often for smarter, better, faster healthcare.
Well, so let's touch into the kind of early stages of stop loss, if you don't mind, Jay. So you were actually telling me stop loss insurance is effectively an offshoot of the casualty market to a degree, right? Which I did not know. It's now under A&H, but the early days of stop loss were not too dissimilar to some of the captive, or not captive, but casualty programs, correct?
Yeah, they were similar. Again, where we get our concept of incurred and paid is based on a claim is made in an occurrence policy. I remember when I first got into the stop loss busy with HCC, or the U.S. Benefits, which was a predecessor acquired by HCC, half the states considered stop loss a P&C product. So we had to have P&C paper to write the product.
And why was that?
I think it's regulator misunderstanding of what it is. Because we took a lot of concepts from P&C, because ultimately we're financial reinsurance. Mm-hmm. We're not health insurance. And that's a critical thing to denote. But as the regulators were looking at it, they were like, well, it's P&C. And we kind of spent a lot of time educating them, going, well, you may consider it P&C, but you have to have a health actuary to price it. Mm-hmm. You really got to be knowledgeable of the health insurance side of the business or the healthcare delivery side of the business to really write this risk properly. But ultimately, all we are is financial reinsurance.
But why was it important in your mind then, though, to get them to acknowledge that it wasn't a P&C product? Was there a benefit to that?
Well, the benefit was, as we got consolidation and everybody was... You had a uniformity, again, because we're insurance. Insurance is regulated by the states. So that means we've got 51 areas that we have to negotiate with, file product with, and we just had continuity of operation. So it wasn't, I need a P&C actuary for this state, and now I need an A&H actuary for this state. It was really to help us from operations and run down cost and make us more efficient. Is why we wanted to see them all on the same platform. And I think right now, if you look at some of the SIA information, I think Arizona is the one that's now advocating that stop loss become a P&C product again.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, why do you think that is? Or do you know much about the background of that?
I don't think I want to comment on why I think a regulator has misinterpreted how a product works. But I think it's pretty common is what they do. And somebody says, oh, I think it's P&C. And okay. So I think they've got a bill out there right now. I think they're trying to make stop loss back to a P&C product.
Interesting.
Which we'll see how that develops.
That explains why that market's so weird, just in general, to try to write business in. But that's probably a different conversation.
I think this is also unique in that in my history in the stop loss world, it's kind of always like regulators understand P&C, they understand A&H, but they don't never understand the stuff in the middle, and we're more in the middle.
Okay.
And so we've always, it's been good for us at times because regulators are kind of like, I don't understand stop loss, I don't understand it, don't want to. And they just let us go. But then there's other times where they try to dig in and it's like, you just don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand how the product works. Please just educate yourself a little bit, then let's have a conversation, or let us come in and educate you.
Yeah.
And
Fair
some will, some won't.
So on the subject of kind of that time period of stop loss insurance, so let's go post convincing the regulators that it is an A&H product and that consolidation or uniformity. What do the early days of taking risk look like then versus now? Because we're going to get into the how big some of the risks are that you take on today, but early days.
The early days, and again, I wasn't around for the earliest days. You still have what I consider the first generation of stop loss underwriters. It was the Ken Daley's, it was the Ernie Clevengers, it was the Lynn Jennings, the guys who I really consider to be the godfathers of stop loss. I mean, these are the guys who formed stop loss companies in the 70s and early 80s when ERISA wasn't even, passed till 72. So they were really at the forefront of that. I really consider myself part of that second generation. Yeah. But that second generation was still really unique in that us and the third-party administrators were tied at the hip. That's how business was distributed. Mm-hmm. It's different today. Most of the business is distributed through brokers and agents or consultants. But back then, it was all distributed through the TPAs. So our partnership with the TPAs was critical. And I always say HCC is a company that grew up with TPAs.
Okay, interesting.
We're very proud of the fact that the majority of our business is still with TPAs. We very much are advocates of the TPA model and what they do. Why? Because that's the partners we grew up with. Yeah. We like to see what TPAs do, and we think they have a better service level overall better at communication, better at communicating with us when stuff happens.
Is that versus an ASO model or versus the broker distributed instead?
It's really versus the ASO model because, again, we are majority broker distributed today. We have great relationships with our broker partners. I think we can have really good conversations. And what that really did is got us closer to the customer. And that was a critical thing for us as an industry. So I'm not saying, we're going back to the, what I would call the 90s, that time period where TPAs kind of controlled that distribution. We weren't as close to the customer or being the broker and or the ultimate policyholder. But today's market, we're much closer to the policyholder, trying to understand what they want. And I think the brokers do a good job of educating us on, here's my client's concerns, here's what they're trying to accomplish, which from an underwriting perspective is always where you want to start. Because one thing that drives me crazy is people, underwriter will go, well, here's how we're going to solve this. Well, is that what the client wants? What is the client looking to solve? Tell us what the broker is trying to advise the client on, and let's see then if we can engineer something for them. Let us solve the problem. I think underwriters are great problem solvers, and a lot of stuff can be solved with insurance, particularly modifications of stop loss insurance. And again, the product suite is also what's really developed in stop loss. The number of products that we have, really back in the day, it was spec, ag, and that was it. There was no concept of cap. There was no concept of,
was lasering even a thing?
No, lasering was absolutely not part of it at that point in time.
Is that because the risk, the upside or downside, if you will, of the potential risk wasn't as great as it is today, where a laser wasn't? Well,
remember, this was pre-ACA, so you had policies that had an $1 million annual cap, or the member would have a $2 million lifetime max. You just had a different risk profile, and it was the Affordable Care Act when we got truly unlimited risk that.
Well, to your credit, your last year, and we'll get into the recent stop loss report that HCC released, but last year there was a page that was dedicated to the uptick in frequency of claims at certain levels, so 500, $1 million, and $2 million, and it was an astonishing pace of growth of frequency post-ACA. Exponential pace of these very large claims after that.
And I think if you look at this year's report, you're going to see that we actually started measuring it from, 2019 forward. And I think for excess of $2 million claims, and sorry, I'm not going to know the number right off the top of my head, but it's up 200 and something % just in a 5-year window, which is incredible. And if you went and indexed that back to 2014, it's exponential growth, as you mentioned. And some of that is, if that's where the law changed and now people have the ability to bill at that. But if we would have been back in pre-ACA, there is no drug or gene therapy manufacturer to come out and said, hey, we're going to charge $3.5 million for a drug when everybody's coverage maxed at $1 million. That market wouldn't have never existed, but only because of the ACA has it existed. Now, with that said, I don't want to make it sound like we're negative on the ACA, because nothing blew up our industry and our business bigger than the ACA, because it forced every employer to really look at how they finance their coverage. How are they financing risk in their employee benefits? And we, the self-funded industry, have been probably the biggest benefactors from the ACA because we've grown our business significantly.
What is the size of the stop loss market today, roughly speaking?
It's about $40 billion.
$40 billion. Okay. And I remember you mentioned the Clevenger report. I remember in the early days for me, stop loss in 2012, 2013, I think it was well less than half of that, if I'm not mistaken.
Well less than half of it. I remember when we thought, I think it was around 2000 or something, the whole industry was about $8 billion.
Okay.
And, at HCC at the time when we merged a bunch of organizations together, we thought we were huge with a 10% market share of an $8 billion market. And now we're 8% market share of a $40 billion market. It's just exponential growth.
With no signs of slowing down too, right? And
Absolutely not.
It's not just the ACA. Obviously you mentioned gene therapy, the size of the claims, which I do want to dig into in a moment, is there are some really extreme price tags attached to certain things that make stop loss important, or so much more important even than it maybe used to be, because no employer outside of your jumbos has the ability to bear the risk of some of the things that are out there. And we're reacting to it, right? You're building products around it, or just pricing commensurately for that risk as well.
We are. Yeah, but some of it is just the natural growth of the market. And this is what I always try to take the history lesson on of going, I remember when we were doing a big claim was you would have an $800,000 bone marrow transplant for breast cancer. That's when we actually were bone marrow transplants were considered a treatment for breast cancer. They're not anymore.
Okay.
But that was the devastating claim. Oh my gosh, you got an $800,000 claim on your policy. Who knew what you were going to do? Then it kind of morphed a little bit. Now we got into $1 million policies. And today I'm kind of like $1 million claim. Okay. They happen.
Yeah.
I review every claim over $1 million within our operation, and I probably look at least 2 a week now. So now that threshold has moved to more of a $2 million threshold, and that's where I started looking. But when we started monitoring our annual report, growth in both $1 million claims and $2 million claims, because I'm, again, using $2 million as our new catastrophic number. But what we've seen is some of the severity has been amazing for us. I would have never contemplated it. And when we really look at claims excess of $2 million, you can put it into 2 buckets.
Okay.
If you look at members of the plans between the ages of 50 to 59, they're a little bit less than 15% of the total spend over $2 million. A little over 15% is 60 to 69. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. That's when we're older. We need more medical care, all that other kind of stuff. But the really big number, so that's 30% total. For that 20-year window, under 10 is 40% of the total spend over $2 million.
Really?
And most of that is from preemie babies or full-term babies with congenital abnormalities.
Okay.
That is really where we're seeing it. And once you get over $4 million, it's almost all under 10. And that is where we're seeing some of the biggest prices, some of the biggest shock values, per se, are coming from infants. And I know we all do industry reports. You can look at Sun does a great report, QB does a great report, Stealth's got one, we do ours. Cancer care is always number one on that as a total cost category. But when you really start breaking it down into the really extreme, it's
the biggest severity claims I've heard of are preemie babies, right? And those perhaps less frequent, but the shock value or the sticker price is astonishing. And do you what kind of drives, obviously we're both not clinicians or we're not in the hospital setting, but what's driving the cost of care and a stay in NICU to be such an outlier in terms of pricing?
I don't know if I can comment on what's driving the pricing. I just know that we see the pricing.
Yep.
Now, I would tell you do have gene therapies now. That is part of it. And while we think the gene therapy market, we started talking about this 4 years ago. We think the market is really starting to talk about it in the last 12 months. But that gene therapy market hasn't really developed outside of, so for us, we've really only had 2 drugs that have really made anything. One is Zolgensma, which is a spinal muscular atrophy drug. It's about 2.2 gross, 1.7. That's been the most popular gene therapy drug that we've seen, but it is a curative drug. Then the other one is Elvitus, and I apologize for pronouncing that wrong.
I actually haven't even heard of that one. Okay.
That one, it treats Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And, we've seen that one. That's running about $3 million, and we've seen a little uptick on that one. Now, Sarepta is a manufacturer of that, and they've really... This one was originally for children under 3, then they got it up to 5. Now it's for under, I think it's like 15 or even up to age 18. But again, it's curative. There's no alternative treatment.
Yeah.
That's driving some of it because that is hospital delivered. But then you also just have the length of stays. I think one thing that we're seeing is, I had one last week. In my career, I never thought I would see a 23-week gestation actually as a live birth.
Wow.
I think... And I don't mean to be morbid on this, but maybe 20 years ago, I don't know if that was considered viable or not.
Yeah.
Today, especially with the way the U.S. birth rate is going, we should consider those viable. And we do the work, for somebody,
of course,
to treat that baby. But, that becomes a very expensive proposition because that's a lot of care that has to happen.
We live in a world that, as medical innovation continues to increase and accelerate, situations like that where 10, 20, 30 years ago that may not have been a viable pregnancy now is, but that's not absent of a very large price tag associated with it because that innovation costs money. And it's always trying to find this balance of the innovation that saves a life or cures a disease. The cost that has to be absorbed in order to accomplish that sometimes seems unpalatable to a lot of people.
And I think we view it as a point of what we want is predictability. Again, I don't mind being in the risk business. I'm in the risk business. I take risk. That's fine. I think what we're looking for is how do we make it more predictable for us? And I think that's where we're a little bit disadvantaged today in that you could have two of the exact same claims, and you are not allowed to know how much it's going to be priced. And I think that's a little bit of where we have our challenges now, because you don't know if it's at one facility in this part of the country, it may be X number, and it may be 2X of that at another. And there's no way to predict it. We're not allowed to have that access. But I do think that's actually where I'm excited about the future of the industry, because I think, I was brought into this business. Again, came in the business of the 90s, and I was always taught that the insurance sector was the Amish of the financial sector. And I was always like, well, okay, that's probably pretty accurate. When you look at kind of what you can do in banking, what you can do in that, the insurance industry has always been a little bit behind. But what is the insurance industry really good at? Data. We love data. I always tell people we're full of underwriters, accountants, and actuaries. Guess who loves data? Insurance people love data. Well, what's the most valuable thing you can have today? Data. So I think we're probably more prepared to handle more data, how we do it. And I think that's where I'm excited about the future of the business, because I think data is really going to drive what we can do. I see the day when we actually have all the first dollar data, we have all the drug data, we have all that, and can actually do not only 12-month predictions on risk, we could do 12, 24, maybe even a 36-month prediction on a potential risk. And I think that's really exciting for me, because, again, you may look at a group and go, yeah, maybe they're not the best this year, but they could be really good in 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And I think that would be exciting to look at business not so much from that adversarial pricing model where we're going, what are we doing every 12 months, to maybe we are looking at, what are we doing for the next 3 years?
You think we could extend the cycles or the rate guarantees longer, more often than is done today, if you have that type of data at your disposal?
I think if you have more of a partnership where the broker, the TPA, the stop loss carrier, we're all sitting on the same data environment, the same data lake or data circle. Yeah, I think there's a lot more impact, and I think there's a lot more value that would come to the ultimate employer from having this more predictable.
Well, to your point, we were talking Granular earlier, and I when they got into this business, so Granular being the stop loss carrier that was owned by Alphabet, the parent company of Google, I'm like, why would Google want to get in the stop loss business? And I think some of it was access to U.S. healthcare data, the claims data itself. So first dollar and catastrophic data to get into a space, probably to get access to information that helps them develop some other line of business outside of it. But what's a good way to get access to that? Be a stop loss carrier that has to request that type of data to price it.
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, $1.3 billion of stop loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has 2 distinct parts. Number 1, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number 2, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
Well, and then I'll also confer on this is who is under probably the most attack now from the cyber criminals. And again, Team HCC, we have a big, robust cyber line of business in our P&C world. It's all of the medical providers and health insurers. Anybody who's got health insurance data, you are under a data attack daily. So you've got to make sure.
What do you think bad actors want with healthcare data? Is there specific things they're looking for?
Oh, I think they're looking for trends. They're looking for, I'm guessing at what the criminals want it for, but there could be fraudulent claims that could be filed. There also could be extortion that's done. There's just bad actors. I won't try to put a limit on what criminal creativity can be, but I think just having that information would be huge. It's also, from a hacker's perspective, it's some of the most protected data. So it's some of the biggest gold stars on their resume by getting this HIPAA protected healthcare data. So it's sexy to obtain that.
And it proves how good they are as being a hacker then.
Yep,
okay.
Exactly. So I think that's what we're seeing too, is about, I forgot my point.
That's okay. Well, I was going to change subjects a little bit anyway. So perfect segue there. So I would like to get into the world of today's market. So to State of the Union of Stop Loss Insurance. So we're in the middle, shooting this in July of 2025. I'm observing some changes, or some hardening is a term we often use. But from your perspective, Jay, because you have obviously an amazing vantage point in this space, how would you state the State of the Union in stop loss today?
I would say, I don't know if I'm using the hardening market. I'm using tightening.
Tightening.
And I think tightening is probably appropriate. But we know with every insurance business, it goes in cycles. The P&C world, the products have cycles. A&H world, we have product cycles. So it goes this soft period, this hard period, and you can measure those. The problem is knowing when they're starting and when they're not starting. But I think it's very definitive we're seeing a hardening and or tightening of the market in the stop loss. Why? 2024. And I think the risk, again, if we're looking at stuff in underwriting year, so underwriting year is always, imagine the effective date that you wrote the business or the start date of it in the next 12 months. If all that's in a one calendar year, we call that the underwriting or the treaty year.
Okay.
And so when we look at 2024, we've just seen a massive cost increase. Okay. Claims frequency has gone up, and claims frequency hasn't gone up just in those excess of $2 million claims. While we're seeing a lot there, we've seen a lot of claim growth in the 200,000 level. And I think that's driven just by the nature of medical costs are going up. But what's also measured in something we put in our annual report is 50% of our policyholders haven't done a spec deductible increase in 4 years.
I saw
and
that
there's
last
another 33% that have done one deductible increase. And now that was caused by a softer market. You could get your rate and you could keep your deductible. But the truth is the employer originally designed, if you really want to mitigate rate increases, you increase your deductible probably every 2 to 3 years. 2 years is probably the best cycle. 3 years is a little bit, but when we see people who haven't increased it in 4 years, that means more claims are going to the stop loss. We do believe in the concept of leverage trend.
Man, I get so many people that just completely disagree with this notion, mostly in the consultant world. They're like, bah humbug on leverage trend. But it's a mathematical equation. It exists. Yeah.
Yeah. If X is going up and Y is staying stagnant, the delta is going to grow. Yes. That's the simple concept of leverage trend. So we are seeing leverage trend go up, and we're seeing more costs going. But that first dollar trend's actually creeping up too. I think we're using one of the higher first dollar trends we've used for 2026. We're using one of the highest trends we've used in the past 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And again, that's driven by the drug industry. Drug prices are going up. PBM pricing is still, a very opaque world that I don't think everybody sees. And we know that medical costs are going up. And medical costs are again, we're in the stop loss business. Where do most of our claims come from? They come from hospitals and they come from drugs, specialty drugs. I always tell people, somebody will come to me and say, hey, I've got this great ortho program. I'm like, my average deductible is $150,000. Unless it's a back surgery, it's not touching my risk. It's material for the employer's underlying risk, but I just don't play in that world. I play in the catastrophic world. And again, we're seeing hospital costs go up pretty significantly. And I think there's a couple factors for that. Yeah. Again, some of it is the post-COVID. COVID was a period where the hospitals, if you looked at, some of the Becker's hospital reports or anything like that, you could see that hospital EBITDA was down during COVID. Why? Because ICU care is not really that profitable. It's the elective surgeries that went kaput and no one was getting anything elective. That's got the higher margin business for hospitals. So hospitals have to recover from that. I also think it takes a little bit for them to renegotiate all their commercial contracts. And when they were renegotiating those commercial contracts with health insurers, I think they absolutely had the upper hand. If you look at the big networks, United Healthcare gave money back because it was so profitable during COVID.
Yeah, that was a weird phenomenon, to see them actually sending money back to policyholders. And that wasn't just them too, I don't believe.
It wasn't just them. But if you think about that from a negotiation standpoint with a provider into your next negotiation, it puts them in a difficult spot. The provider absolutely had the upper hand on negotiations. So we're starting to see the cost impact of that.
Yeah. And can I extend that line of conversation? Because this is what I was hearing about the COVID rebound back in 22 or 23, right? So we all saw the lowering of trend during 20 to 21 time frame. And then you saw the rebound and the expectation was normalized. What I'm actually realizing is it's now continuing to creep up as a result of that cycle, and especially the conversation we had over coffee. I'd like to double click on the why there, or the why 2024 did we finally see it fully materialize?
I think it started in the underpinnings of 23. We started to see it in 23 on the large claim side. And I think that was hospitals recovering revenue, lost revenue, and trying to manage their book. And I'll be the first to say, managing a hospital is probably the most complicated business model you could ever manage. So very difficult. But as they were trying to recover some revenue, we started to see it click up in 2023 on the high end side. In 2024 is really when I think the new network contracts were all completed. You had a little bit of maybe some recovery with delayed care coming back into it, although I don't put a lot of value in delayed care. And then you also just saw the hospitals. We talked about this as on the hospital excess side of the business, the hospital liability excess. That market has really, really tightened up on the P&C side.
Okay.
And so I think a hospital administrator now has got to find all the revenue avenues they can, and there really are. We're the private pay. We do a lot of offset for the public programs. I think somebody measured it, and I can't credit them, but I think it was normally private pay is about 180 to 250% of public pay. So, and then you also have everybody's looking at how do we cut, reimbursement for Medicare and Medicaid because of their financial solvency, which is again just cost shifting back to the private pay.
Yeah.
So I think that's all been factors that have just built up. But it really, for me, came to a head in the 2024 year.
Yeah. Did you said kind of average loss ratios ticked up pretty noticeably during that time?
We think everybody ticked up.
Yeah.
The only people I've talked to who didn't tick up in 2024 is because they ticked up in 2023 and they fixed it in 2024.
Do you think they just kind of got out ahead of it, or were they lucky taking corrective action prior? Or what do you
think they got burned pretty bad in 2023 and were forced to take action.
Forced to take action. Fair enough.
Yeah, they had to. But again, I think the market, we saw the whole industry, the NAIC reporting just came out, which comes out about every June, and we do a lot of internal work to consolidate that. But we think the industry loss ratio, it went up to about 6 points.
That's okay.
So the industry is running in the mid 80s.
Okay.
Now I'll tell you, we put it into three distinct buckets. We put it in the top 5 ASO carriers, who are most of your commercial markets. They run their stop loss probably in the low 90s. Which is a really difficult space to run any kind of insurance product because that's just the loss percentage. You still have expenses and acquisition costs and everything else on top of that. We have what I consider the top 5 markets of direct carriers who are top 10. So there's 5 that are health insurers, 5 that are direct carriers. We're all about over $1 billion, but our loss ratio was in the low 80s.
Okay.
And if you threw out the one outlier for this year, we're all about in the mid 70s, which I think is a really...
That's kind of target, isn't it? Somewhere in the mid to low 70s?
Everybody's got their own target.
Okay.
But we think there is appropriate margin in that. There is for us. I can't comment on my competitors.
Sure.
But then when you see the non-top 10, we saw that market definitely creep up again also. But again, there's 92 players that are not top 10. And so you've got some that are doing really well. There was actually a handful of ones that we saw premium growth and loss ratio decrease, which is impressive in that market. But majority across the board was everybody saw premium growth with significant loss ratio increase.
Yeah.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
Yeah, and so that's one of the big reasons I was really excited to have you on for any reason, right? And I appreciate you coming on, but it was to really the state of the union as to why, and you've covered a lot of the why, but getting the validation, because I can see from my perspective in our world, and we do business with 3 stop loss carriers, with you guys being one of them, is I can see what's happening a little bit in the tightening and the challenging. And then you get noise around that because nobody likes prices going up. I get it, right? But it's not like it was done in a vacuum, nor was it done in isolation and we were the only ones recognizing recognizing it. I see the whole market discussing this, and some of your competitors that are publicly traded that are obviously forced to disclose it, they announced that earlier in this year in earnings calls, their loss ratio as well as their average renewals being a lot higher than it has been in the past. And I think that's setting a cascade or a wave of recognition that this is where we are in 2025.
Yeah, I absolutely think we're in that tightening, hardening market. I think the days of the employers who are, let's call them average risk, seeing single digit rate increases, that's gone.
Yeah.
It's going to be a double digit rate increase market going forward. Only your best of your best is going to get a single digits. And, that best of the best is less than 10%. And I know everybody's going to say, yeah, but my client's the best of the best.
Of course.
But they're not. The average rate increase is going to be pretty thick. It's going to be, and I think some of it's going to be rate. I also think some of it's going to be terms. And that's what I see a real change in, is that will the number of cap products will that go down? Will your number of split funded accounts? I mean, my personal opinion is I don't find any value in split funding anymore. If somebody wants to take, you've got a $500K premium and you want to take $50,000 in split funded or aggregating spec, whatever term you want to use, I don't find that attractive from a risk taker perspective anymore. Because if the claim's going to be $1 million, I'd rather have $50,000 of premium than just having you take $50,000 off the claim. It's not a good trade anymore. Yeah. There are some, and I see the terms of the market is really where the impact is going to come.
Okay, so let me ask you about that. So when you say the terms of the market, and I actually do want to have a conversation too about the cycles and when you get out of a tightening market, what that looks like to go back into one that's a little more competitive or the pricing isn't quite as challenging. But what kind of terms are you envisioning might be changing right now? Is it just the price action itself, or are there other provisions that you see going away potentially, or the caps getting higher?
I think the cost of a cap or ability for a carrier to throw the cap into the pricing, that's going to be eliminated. They're going to charge you for it now. You're going to pay for the premium product. If you want something, I think there's a big part of the market that, is looking for really heavy run-in contracts. I think those are going to be priced appropriately going forward, where maybe in the past that was kind of, all right, it's maybe a point or two, it's thrown in. Nope, it's going to be a handful of points now, and it's going to be charged. Experience refunds, which are something that happens in the traditional single case market, I don't see that being very viable. If you can keep those, good luck. But I see those are really drying up, because again, if you're trying to manage a portfolio of business, 50% is going to be on the loser side, 50% is going to be on the profit side if you nail the underwriting.
Yeah.
And so now you're going to say, on the 50% that's good, I'm going to give a portion of that back, which now means I need to mitigate and make that 60% of the portfolio and only 40% of the portfolio be bad. So I don't see a lot of experience refunds growing.
Yeah, and I never was a huge fan, and we're obviously going to get in the weeds for some people that don't love stop loss as much as we do, but experience refunds, I never really understood paying in advance for the potential to receive some money, a little bit more money later, 18 months down the line, 24 months down the line, whenever it gets reconciled. That value equation didn't really make sense to me as an employer. I would much rather just say, either buy up in spec deductible to offset your costs, or get an ag spec potentially that you got dollar for dollar trade-off, but not necessarily pay more in premium to get more premium back later. I just didn't understand.
I think it was done in the softer market just as a distribution strategy, just to kind of say, hey, I'm throwing it in. Well, the throw-ins are now going to be eliminated. And once you put a benefit out there, it's hard to take a benefit back. So I think that's going to be some of the struggle, but that's where I think I don't think many people were getting a big premium increase to put experience refund in it, which means they're going to pull it off as fast as possible.
Okay.
That would be more my logic.
But are you seeing then any innovation, though, in product? You and I talked about this over coffee. There hasn't been a ton of true innovation in product.
In product itself, I view that the market has been mature enough. I look at what we do, and I always call ourselves the Swiss Army knife of stop loss, because we've got all these little things that we can do on a stop loss product, but the core of the product hasn't really changed. I think the innovation is going to be around in how we rate stuff, how we look at it, how do we measure the risk long term. But I also think there could be some innovation. And one thing that we saw, and we'll go back to some of the Affordable Care Act, is we actually saw, stop loss has always been a product. As the employer increases inside, they buy less coverage. Mm-hmm. And as they increase the number of lives, they buy less coverage. They do less for stop loss. And we know that once you get to a certain point, why are you buying stop loss anymore? So we're one of those unique products that as employers get bigger, we go away. We saw more employers enter back into the market wanting to buy $1 million deductibles. I've actually sold $1.5 million deductibles. But I don't know that those are necessarily efficient models to sell large group on an excess of loss basis. I do think there's other models that will be developed over time that may be catering more to the large segment market that would look different than excess of loss.
Yeah, they're more like financial engineering products or arbitrage to a degree with access to funding. And you know, it's more of a, I don't know, a loan or, you know, of capital funds that are available if and when needed, but not true insurance product. Is that what you're describing?
Well, I think it would be more of it's an insurance product that maybe doesn't have one claim blow it up. It becomes more of a pool above a certain deductible, or it becomes something that's a little bit different rating. And I don't want to get too much into it because I think that's all still being experimented with and what designed. But I think that there's some innovation. I also think you've got on the other side of the spectrum for your really small, because I still think I'm very much an advocate of the self-funded industry. I think for what we're doing, I think our industry is still going to grow tremendously over the next 5 years, but it's also going to grow in the lower segments. More employers, I think, are looking to go self-funded long-term. Captives is a great strategy for that fully insured conversion. And we are also seeing the development of level-funded markets. I think the level-funded market the past couple of years has really been dominated by your big four, and I think they've been pricing for share, not for risk. So that will eventually come to an end, and I think you get a pretty robust level-funded market in the self-funded space after that.
I think you're probably correct. And you're seeing a lot more emerging unbundled versions of level funded options, right? Even that's a difficult space to price stop loss in, especially the size segment, 20, 25, 30 lives, something in that size segment. But I do think the market's reacting to say, I don't want a carrier driven product. I'm wanting to get away from the carrier model because I left the fully insured model for that reason. And then I end up with a carrier and a level funded product that still has the entire house slanted in their favor. So I do think there's demand for it. Now, I don't know how profitable and how difficult it is to actually going to be able to price that at scale so that those are sustainable products. So I'd love to hear you weigh in on that.
I think that's fair, but I also think the reason that those groups are looking for it, again, they want their data. They want to be able to customize their plan. They want to be able to do more about their plan. And I've always kind of said, you feed those who are hungry. Well, it's really that 50 to 500 life market. They're hungry for change. They're willing to try new stuff. They're willing to do innovation because they've been sold this bill of goods for the past several years that, hey, the network discounts are going to take care of you. Don't worry about it. And I'm not saying network discounts aren't valuable, but at the end of the day, from my perspective on the catastrophic side, they're fairly uniform. And I think when we see kind of like some of the federal disclosure, all that kind of stuff, you are seeing convergence around pricing in hospitals and networks because of the public notification requirements of it. So you're seeing, some of maybe the more expensive, they've gone down, I think 5%, and the lowest ones have gone up 5%. So you're seeing more of a convergence happening because of disclosure requirements. Makes sense. As that happens, the network proposition gets diminished. So how do we react to that? How do we handle that going forward?
Having spent years working alongside healthcare leaders, brokers, and employers, I know how overwhelming healthcare can feel for our customers. We've all been there. Those renewal conversations that never seem to get easier. Rising pharmacy costs and medical costs, and no real transparency into where healthcare dollars are going. That's why I'm excited about Nomi Health. They're not just fixing the old system. They've rebuilt self-funded benefits from the ground up. With Nomi's network, you can offer something truly different. No copays, no deductibles, zero out-of-pocket costs when members see a provider. It's the kind of benefit that makes everyone ask, why hasn't healthcare always worked this way? Ready to bring your clients something different? Visit nomihealth.com and see how Nomi is rebuilding healthcare, one employer and one community at a time.
Well, I would love, and we'll move into future state in a moment. There's one more item I want to touch on before we go future state, but I would love to get into this notion of optimized or high performance networks, right? Because I always want to talk about what propels our industry forward. And if we're in the business of managing and mitigating risk, how do we do that most effectively? But before we do that, I would be remiss, since you obviously know our founders very well and you're a partner and in the early days of this idea of a captive, like who, I don't know if you can say who approached who, but the notion of a captive in 2016 or 15, whenever the relationship started versus today, did you think that idea was going to be a viable and sustainable vehicle for self-funding?
We started looking at captives in 2012, 2013, and it was really one of the projects I worked on.
What attracted you about the model itself?
Again, I'm an insurance nerd. I've got the degrees in insurance. I knew what captives were before, and I'd seen how captives work and knew they were kind of like the educated to the next class of risk management. And so we started looking at it in 2012 and like, how could we build our own? We saw it was a really nascent market at that time. And we started looking, and we did build a couple of captive programs that were not with the Pareto founders. And we had a couple of them going. And then I think it was just a confluence of, we were a little bit in the market. I was talking to Andrew and it was kind of like, hey, we kind of get along really well. And, hey, how can we do something to build something better? I think one of the first questions Cav asked me was, if we did work with you, would you ever cap our growth? And I was like, absolutely not. Go.
Please go.
Run.
Yeah.
Run as fast as you can. I'll try to keep up.
Yeah.
And I think that was really where it was born.
Could you have envisioned the captive space, not even just us, but the captive space being as big as it is right now?
I did not envision the captive space being quite as big as it is, but I knew it would have feet. I think what I learned about the captives, and when we really started, I thought it was going to be employers between like 300 to 1,000 lives who knew they were better than average risk. I thought those would be the populations that migrated into captives. Completely wrong. It was really what I learned for the whole process. It was employers saying, I want to go self-funded, but I don't want to be a lone wolf. I want to know that I'm going into somebody who's actually, I'm going with other employers. I'm sharing risk. They felt safer in the captive. And that's where we think that's the value of the captives is you want to be part of a community that's working to manage and handle your claim situation. What are the best processes? What are the best procedures? What new and innovative products are out there that you can caption? Oh, and then you can bulk buy.
Yeah, economies of scale.
And economies of scale. And that's for stop loss, that's the business model, economies of scale. So I think it's taken off way more than I ever expected.
And I think one of the most attractive things on the other side of it, of course, obviously the growth of new business is attractive, but the retention side of captives is much higher than traditional stop loss as well. And so we're on the same business. You want to grow, you want to sell, but it's easier to keep groups, especially ones you want to keep, than it is to go hunt and build, bring in new. So the more you keep, the more you grow as a result of it. And did you suspect the retention levels would be as high as they are, or was that a phenomenon that would kind of surprise you?
We expected the retention to be much higher than the average business. I don't think we expected it to be 95, 96, 97 at times. And there have been years where it's even been higher than that. But we knew it would be sticky. And it is sticky business because, again, once you're in the program, you're in the program. And you've bought into it. And we think that's where the value is. But we also think it's having that retention allows us to do the new business and add more to it.
Right.
So it really is.
You think of it like a flywheel, right? It's a like a positive feedback loop, if you will. Because your retention's so high, you can grow, and you can grow because your retention is so high, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger like a snowball rolling downhill.
I think that's a big piece of it, but I also think the other piece of it is knowing that we do put in the right programs. We are managing risk. We are going and saying, hey, there's a better way to do this. Is it bringing in a certain vendor 1 year to help control with some aspect that's growing? Yeah, that's it. And there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that the employers may not see day to day. But, it could be, hey, we got notified by the TPA there's this catastrophic claim. We had the partnership to go with the captive, with everybody saying, we're going to manage this.
Yeah, let's go rally around and solve it, right? Yeah.
Because that employer or that consultant and broker doesn't want to be the one who goes, yeah, my group blew this up. If I've got a chance to go and mitigate it, I'm going to go mitigate it because I don't want to be the one guy at the table who didn't mitigate their massive claim. And I think that's a cultural event that's very positive.
It's like you could be reactive in nature after the fact. You could be proactive, which is trying to prevent, or you could just say actively manage it. And I had a post this morning that I was sharing with you about this notion that some people perceive I go self-funded or I go into a captive, I've now solved my healthcare problem. I say you've taken the first step into solving it so that you can try to solve it. But the notion that just because you went from fully insured to self-funded or into a captive, now you fixed it. I think that's a complete misconception.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I likened it to going to the gym. You buy a gym membership, The gym membership doesn't get you in shape. You get access to the tools, you get access to machines, maybe like the community, but you have to actively exercise if you want to achieve your fitness goals, right? And so I think that's a pretty good analogy to this notion of going self-funded or using a captive. And I get frustrated at times when people won't get perhaps the outcomes they're looking for. And then you go, well, what did we do to solve it? Well, I didn't really change anything. I just bought stop loss. Okay, well then that's part of the problem. We got to go attack your claims.
And we see that a lot also on all of our captive business everywhere. Is you'll maybe have somebody goes, oh, I want this case to go into a captive. Well, the case is on fire. I understand why you want that, but no, I can't in good faith put you in the captive when you're in this situation. It's the captive itself doesn't fix it. Mm-hmm. It's just an avenue or a vehicle to get there eventually. I think your analogy is dead on.
Well, I'm going to get another analogy.
You're getting the tools, but you still have to use the tools.
You have to use the tools. But if you bring the case that's on fire, well, maybe the pool is big enough that the fire will dissipate and it doesn't heat the water. But if you bring enough cases that are on fire into a small pool, you've now got a boiling pool, which is going to be catastrophic to that pool. So you're right. You have to do the right triaging and screening to ensure it doesn't mean only cherry picking risk, but you have a very good blend and you have an emphasis on pricing for the good risk so that more of it comes in. So I was going to ask you, Jay, on the future state, right? And this can be stop loss as well, but I really want to talk about this notion of the marketplace of managing claims, moving away from traditional PPO networks and moving into this world of optimizing networks, narrowing them down, high performance, whatever the term you want to use, but direct contracting in a narrower space to get better pricing. So how do you see a stop loss carrier can play a role in incentivizing that type of consulting?
Well, and I think the one thing we've always educated around is from a stop loss perspective, we're the better. We're the ones when programs come in that we're going to place a bet on what we think is going to be productive and what's not. So, if you gave me three of the exact same cases and they had three separate programs, technically what I should be doing is saying, this program I think is going to perform best, so they're getting a lower rate. This next one is probably based on what they're doing is going to get medium. They'll get a medium rate. This program I really don't like. It's going to get a higher rating. Mm-hmm. And I see that just growing more and more. More of what we do from vendor management, what we do from how we look at what networks are performing where and how are they optimized, are they more focused on getting to the right facilities for the right care with the best outcomes, or are they more of any willing provider can be here and we're not going to try to do anything to control that? Well, there's going to be a difference in rating going forward on that. We're going to put a lot of incentive around how do we incentivize employers and their broker consultants to go and say, you want to go to this program because I can get you a better rate now because I think it's going to perform better. And again, I did this with some providers in this Dallas area several months ago, and I was just trying to explain to them. They were coming back and saying, hey, we struck this great direct-to-employer deal, but nobody picked it up. And I was kind of like, well, did I know about it as an underwriter? And they were like, we don't know. And I was like, if I don't know about it, I can't rate for it. If you give me ABC network and it's worked the way it's always done, and you do something really innovative and you think you put a lot of value into it, but I don't know what it is, I'm not going to give you any different rating from the average rating on the business. You got to be a communicator with it. And I do view our job as stop loss as we're placing bets. Mm-hmm. We're placing bets on what we think is going to be the best performance, which also requires data. And I think that's the real future of the business. Data is going to drive all of our decisions. Underwriters are data focused anyway, but we're going to get more granular in the data, more, bigger data packets. There's more data out there to purchase on commercial markets because again, it's been monetized. So, can I go buy Truvian data? Can I go buy another data set? Can I build my models off that? I think that's going to be the real future of the market. I see us as stop loss carriers becoming very niched in what we do. So there may not be this stop loss carrier who goes, I just write everything that comes in. Nope. They're going to have their risk profile of what they like and what their data says where they should be based on their performance. Yeah. We're going to do the same thing. Yep. We've actually been doing that for years. And again, that's where I think a lot of the AI risk tools are going also, is that those AI risk tools are trying to say, hey, this is a good risk versus this is not a good risk. I still think that's in the nascent part of the development. I don't think they're they're directionally okay, but they're not really precise yet.
Yeah.
But that's going to grow over time. They will get there. Those tools will be developed.
Are we going to get to the point of like a minority report where we know the crime is going to happen in advance of it happening, right? I mean, it's very difficult to expect AI to predict with that level of precision who's going to be at risk and at when and how much on an individual basis, right? So the directionality is useful in setting pricing or green, yellow, or red risk. I don't know if the expectation is ever that it becomes so predictive that you know what's going to happen in advance. Right.
Well, so I would argue, you can't predict a preemie baby. You can't predict an motor vehicle accident. You can't predict a burn. That's kind of stuff is never going to be predicted. But can you start getting better predictions on medical pathways over time? Yes. We know disease states and how they manage. We know that maybe there are biometric measures. We know that there's other factors that could influence how that claim develops. And that's what I think it'll be more around. Yeah. Will it be perfect? Absolutely not. It'll never be Minority Report where, we can go intercept it, 5 minutes before it actually happens. Hey, this person's about to, get in a motor vehicle.
Can I be the Tom Cruise that does the selling of that stop loss product?
Only you can be the Tom Cruise.
Thanks,
you're the only person disqualified. Okay.
Appreciate that. Yeah. But on your point of the betting, right? I talk to a lot of point solutions, as you can imagine, because a lot of people want to say, hey, can I come on your platform and talk about what we do? And so I have to constantly kind of field and make sure I'm talking to the right ones. But a lot of those folks will ask me in calls, hey, how do I get to a stop loss carrier? Like, how can I get this validated and proved? Because I've always told them, and my thought is, you have a stop loss carrier as an independent validator of whether something's actually going to have a material impact on claims. And if you, the risk taker, is willing to place a bet at a lower price point because this thing is involved, then you have validated, at least to a degree, that you think it's going to work. So don't convince me on a podcast necessarily that your solution works. Go to an HCC or a Sun Life or insert name here and go get them to look at your data set and show them that it will save money to the extent that they'll price it appropriately. There you go. You have a stand.
So let me get on my soapbox for a little bit, because that vendor is going. I can take that meeting from, you name any vendor out there. I can take that in every 15 minutes, every hour of the week for the full year. Yep. And it's always they come to the market, or they come to someone like us and saying, well, here's what we do. We want you to give us a discount. And usually that discount is equal to whatever their PEPM is. And I'm kind of like going, well, yeah, it's easy to sell free.
Yeah.
That's not what I do. Come to me with some real idea of how you're going to do it, how you're going to test it, and how you're going to prove your savings over time, and how you're going to be on risk for those savings.
Yes.
Because again, you want me, I'm never going to just blind bet. I can't blind bet. So if you can't come to me with data that I can give an actuary that they can validate, you can't come to me with a process that I can validate where you're going to impact it, then there's no sell there. Come to me with something that's really tangible, but also come with me knowing that it's going to take 6, 12, maybe even 18 months to prove if it really is that way. Participate in the risk.
Yeah.
Don't just ask me to discount and let me take 100% of the risk while you make the fee.
Right.
That drives me insane. So,
no, I'm with you though. I mean, and that's what I'm saying is, like, if it gets to the extent that you do acknowledge there's real world impact on a solution being available, that's impressive, right? That is putting somewhat of a third party stamp of approval that they're doing something.
And we have those programs today that we truly believe in. We've seen them perform.
Can you share? Like, I mean, what has risen to the level that a Jay Ritchie goes, you know what, that's going to have an impact on claims?
So I'll go ahead and say there are several vendors out there that, even from us, from either a pre or a post, they've just been, every vendor or cost containment manager can come back and be, I got a one-hit wonder for you. Okay, you did the one. And what we really see is somebody comes into our shop, they do great for a month, they think they've won the business, they've created this great pipeline, and then they just fall off on their work ethic. But I'll tell you, there's two companies that I do think do a pretty good job for us in cost management. Valens is one of them.
Oh, shout out to Valens, sponsor of the show. I didn't ask you to say that, but thank you for that.
We've had a very good track record with Rob and what they have developed.
Yeah, Rob's a stud.
And then if you want kind of the post really aggressive cost containment, HPC is a really aggressive cost containment.
Tell me about them. I don't know if I'm familiar with them.
I'm going to let my staff tell you. I just know that we've seen really good results from them. They're aggressive, but
what category is that in?
That's usually like, hey, we've got something that was If we can catch it pre-adjudication, they're really good at going in and negotiating the claim and cleaning the claim to making sure. Because I think one thing that does happen in our industry is that there's a lot of, I had this meeting in DC about 8 years ago with a very large hospital system in New Jersey. And the president of the hospital sat there and told me, he goes, our job is to throw everything into the claim because it's your job to figure out what's right and what's not. We're going to throw everything against the wall to see what sticks. I was like, okay, great. But here's my problem. Once that gets repriced in the network, we can't touch it because it's network protected. Well, so when do we actually get to audit and clean the claim and make sure there's no duplicates, make sure all of that? Most of your TPAs have software to do that. But, we've seen some people that come in and it can be very aggressive. HPC, one of them, going, if we get it to where maybe it's prepayment and sometimes even post-payment, going back and saying, hey, let's actually make it a clean claim now. Let's get it clean and then let's reprice it.
Well, that's one of the most frustrating things, I think, just as a outside observer, is the idea that a claim needs to be cleaned up, that there's so much potential. You can call it fat, mistakes, fraud, waste, abuse, whatever term you want to use. We all kind of understand that there's a very large, probably minority percentage of claims that have had duplicate charges, unnecessarily large charges, et cetera, et cetera. So this notion that you have to clean a claim in the first place is so frustrating to me. And I get it. I accept that it is, but
it's the nature of the beast that we live in. It's the nature of the world we live in. I also think it's because, if I'm on the medical provider side, I don't have privy to what the insurance carriers approving and not approving. So I do have to throw it against the wall. So I accept that, but I don't accept that we can't, when they throw it against the wall, that we don't get to go scrape the wall clean and only leave with the parts that we think we actually owe.
Sure.
And that's part of the adjudication process.
Well, so let's have Jay Ritchie, the consultant, for a moment. I'm going to ask you questions if you're a consultant. So an employer, you got a client, and you're advising them to go self-funded. Set aside whether the vehicle's a captive or traditional, don't mind there. But what are the things that you're going to say, you need to address this, or you need to partner with this type of entity? What would you do on a very basic level with not knowing the location, et cetera?
So first and foremost, I will say I am a stop-loss guy. I'm on the backside of it. I don't know if I'm qualified to go sit in front of an employer. There's a reason I sit in this chair and not a broker's chair.
So if an employer does X, Y, Z, and you go, oh, that's an employer trying to do the right things, what are those things in your mind?
I'm usually looking for is, what PBM are you using? Because again, I think that is the most opaque part of our industry. And are you using somebody who truly is a transparent PBM, even though I hate that word because I think it's completely abused. Every TPA or every PBM wants to say they're a transparent PBM. I think there's only a handful that actually are. I want to see that you're controlling that PBM aspect. And I just want to see that you're actually looking at claims. That's the big dichotomy of our business is that, our TPA partners, they're an efficiency model. Their job is to get it from point A to point B as fast and as efficient as possible. When you sit on the risk side, you're going to say, well, no, we want you to look at every claim like it's its own independent claim. Well, that's not realistic either. So I just want to know that certain claims are getting triggered for review. Doesn't depend on what that review process is. I want to see that, if we do find an abusive claim, let's say someone's doing infusions in an outpatient settlement or outpatient situation, and they're charging, $50,000 for an infusion that should cost $5,000. I want to see that that's being attacked or there's some kind of control to hit that. That's really the stuff I'm looking for. And I'm a little bit outside because I don't underwrite actively anymore. My underwriters could probably go, "Oh my God, he's butchering this." But
I think both of your points are correct.
Ask our underwriters because they're the ones who are seeing really what impacts claims and what doesn't.
But this is if I do have employers that are listening, and consultants obviously quite a bit are listening. I want to shake and just say at least do these things. Like in the PBM is exactly where I would start as well. And you have to be very selective about the PBM and the contract that you enter into. Transparency, that's a buzzword, fine. But is it truly pass through? Is it focused on lowest net cost? Is the formulary flexible enough that where you can get access to biosimilars for just some very basic things that should be the standard for the pharmacy industry? Make sure those things are in place. And chances are you got 15 to 25% savings on your pharmacy spend right away by just a better contract. So that's step one in my mind, usually.
And to me, I also want to see some more discipline on what they're doing with a wrap network. I really, I think we always just want to go, oh, let's just go buy a quick wrap network. And half the time, if it's truly an out-of-network claim, obviously if you've got employees or members living in an area, you want some kind of network there. But if somebody is just completely out of area, Don't put a network on that. Negotiate it as an out-of-network claim. You'll do 10 times better.
Really? Okay.
Let us come into the situation. Let us bring some of our vendors, some of our partners in and negotiating on an out-of-network basis. Because once you put it on that network basis and you buy that one-time access for a network, it's protected. We can't really look at it. And you're buying one-time access to a network. It's not a good deal.
Yeah, fair enough.
You're not getting the good pricing. You're getting a one-time access pricing. And we would rather see those claims out of network and negotiated rather than in network and processed.
Interesting. Okay. Well, why don't we do this and it's kind of zooming forward and then zooming up, Jay, getting out of this cycle, right? Like what are you predicting in terms of this tightening market if you had a crystal ball to a degree where we get out of this cycle and you see pricing normalize and maybe single digit increases for the average employer comes back if ever? Like what is normally happens to get us out of this tight market?
Well, so again, this is where I go to our concept of I think we're going to look back 5 years and go, I can't believe we used to do it the way we do it today.
Okay.
And I think that's really where we're going to talk about. And I hate to pound on it, but it's data. What are we doing with data? How are we getting data? I think we will have a process in the future where the people who give us the first dollar data so that we can actually see what's going on are going to have a much more advantageous pricing world than those who go, well, we really don't want the carrier to know anything. Well, okay. Now, here's what I always tell people. More data doesn't make underwriters more aggressive. Less data doesn't make underwriters more aggressive.
Right.
More data makes underwriters more aggressive. So when they have the data, when they can look at stuff and they get confident, underwriters by nature, and I'm one of them, they're generally pessimist, and that's what they are. Yeah. So the less data, they're going to see more bad. So if you think about it as a circle and they can only see 10% of the circle, they're going to assume the rest of the circle is negative. Where if they can see 50% of the circle, they're going, okay, maybe I'm feeling better. And if they can see 75 or 80% of the circle, that's when they go, yeah, I love this case. I'm going after this. Yeah. That's the real secret. And that's where I think, again, the data platforms that we will develop over the next several years, maybe some of the AI processing that comes around them, that's really going to be the change for the industry. I can see how we can make maybe today we come with a big hammer and we hit the same thing all the time, maybe getting more tactical in how we look at certain risk profiles. We may say, you got 10 groups. We want to see this program on these three, this on this, this on this. And when you get that, you get this block rating that comes around it. I can see a much more detailed underwriting review of not only the current risk, the past risk, but what we think is the future risk of the case and how we impact it. So again, I think a lot of brokers go, I don't want the carrier to have all this information. They may hit me with a laser. They may do all this kind of stuff. Well, maybe we may say, if you don't do something, there's a laser, but here's my program that I can put in that actually has better outcomes for the patient, cost you less, and just let me know I can impact it. And I take the risk on this.
My favorite situation, and I know it seems kind of weird, but is a contingent laser with a plan attached to that contingent laser because we've identified them and we've identified a potential or probable solution for them. So yes, it's a laser, but it's contingent upon a condition or a treatment protocol. Yeah. And we know we can solve for it. But in the situation you're describing, which is less data, less revealing of the information, we've always seen those vague diagnoses, like undisclosed diagnosis of whatever. And it's like, oh, $75,000. Well, is that $75,000 acute, nothing that's an issue? Or is that $1 million claim on the cusp of happening that we don't know? Guess which stance the underwriter is most likely to take?
Right. They're going to take a conservative approach.
Exactly.
Which again is where I don't like contingent lasers at all.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of them.
So what do you do instead? Just straight laser? Or?
I think they're tough. Okay. Because again, I think with contingent lasers, you get kind of a vague wording. And so it could be something like we go, here's the worst one I can think of is that we go, all right, there's going to be this contingent laser if they have this kind of transplant. Well, they didn't have a transplant. They went and did cellular therapy instead. Well, now there's no laser, but you actually had a more expensive therapy.
Sure. Yeah.
To me, I want to see more of we want to see how this person's being managed. Tell us how they're going to be managed so that we know we're impacting the claim and we may be able to take it. I think that is one area in our underwriting that we've really done, and I don't know if I should say it or not, but we've always had this threshold of known risk. We're taking a much higher level of known risk on going into a policy today than we did 5 years ago, mainly because we think we can impact them.
Okay.
And if we can impact them, that's the difference.
Interesting.
And the funny part is, we started this conversation by saying we stand at the back of the line. we do stand at the back of the line financially, but because we've seen all this for all these years, we're actually pretty good at going, hey, here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
How do we impact this? Or we can see somebody in the line, if it's getting out of line, raise their hand and go, I need help. And we're like, oh God, we got so many vendors that specialize in so many different things. And I love feeding them opportunities.
Well, we had to the subject of Valence earlier, you brought them up, but we have a renewal situation where we have partnership with Valence, as you well know, and they have an infusion solution. And we're working right now on a site of care redirect for an infusion situation to avoid the risk that's going to be maintained on the plan is affecting the renewal. So here we are with you and with Valence stepping in and saying, hey, we think we can solve this, and let's bring it to the table on behalf of our consultant and the employer to do so. And I view that as a big part of our value proposition as a captive.
And again, I always use the analogy of you've got to have a lot of arrows in your quiver to attack all the different type of disease states. And I do think there's real vendor fatigue sometimes from groups of going, wait, I got to have this for dialysis. I got to have this here. I got to have this here. I got to have all these different things. But that's also where I think the value in something like you guys do with Pareto, or what we do even with our own block of going, hey, raise your hand. We may have somebody who can impact it. Yeah. And if not, I'll find somebody who can. And again, that's where someone my size has been in the business as long as can. I have a pretty active team in our SCU and PCU units, preliminary claim unit, specialty claim unit. That's what they do, is they look for savings opportunities when called upon to say, hey, do you know anybody who can impact this? And we will find them.
That's how you decommoditize stop loss.
Correct.
We're in this world of like where people are trading. You mentioned 92 some odd stop loss carriers and MGUs outside the top 10 or whatever it may be. So you have over 100 markets you can potentially go to. Right. And unfortunately, the consulting business, for better or worse, often commoditizes stop loss, throws it on a spreadsheet, says pick a number, here's a couple of provisions to compare, and go, right? And by really distilling it down to those few bullet points, not capturing this part of the story, which you just described as we're willing and ready and able to help you solve a problem as soon as it arises, that's a differentiator that's never going to show up on a spreadsheet. And so it's frustrating to me that we're kind of in this space right now where it's just a commodity.
Well, and I always have a saying, everybody in my shop hears me say it all the time, is like, treat me like a commodity and I'll act like one.
Yeah.
But don't treat me like a commodity and we can be one heck of a good partner. And again, I tell all our broker consultants that we work with, I don't want any credit with the employer. I want the savings. If my job is to make the broker look as good as absolutely possible to the client, because let's be honest, my client, the policyholder, is the ultimate client under the law, but truly my client is who brought me the business. Yeah. Is it the TPA who's selling it? Is it the broker, the consultant? That's my client. So whatever I can do to make them look good, I'm going to do. You know, and that's the other part about stop loss is I always try to educate people of going, when you move from that health insurance plan to that self-funded plan, you go from like this one box that everything's incorporated in and you don't get to see all the inside working parts to this part that's absolutely transparent. You see every moving cog, and when it breaks, you got to deal with it. And that's one thing I think we're pretty good at is when someone calls us up and said, hey, something went wrong. Great. How do we fix it?
Yeah.
What do we got to do? And again, there's horse trading that comes in with that. There's everything to make a deal. But that's where I say also a big differentiator in the market is going, we know things are going to blow up from time to time. Let's work to solve them.
Let's figure it out. Yeah, it's nobody's ever going to be perfect. No business you ever partner with will ever be perfect. But what are they doing when things go wrong, and how are they helping you solve it? That's where your relationships really get deepened. I think is in those type of tough situations you work together to figure it out and come out the other side.
But again, that's the front end of you're going to treat me like a commodity on the front end. I'm going to act like a commodity on the back end.
Yep.
Don't treat me like a commodity on the front end. And I will do whatever I can not to be one on the back end.
100%.
I want to find a solution because we don't want the reputational risk for the industry. That is, again, probably one of my bigger things is, do we do things as an industry that ultimately damage us? You know, and that's one thing I'm always worried about of going, hey, if we take this kind of approach on certain claims or certain things, you know, I think it's hilarious. We had so many people going, we want you to specifically state that you cover gene therapy in your policy. And I was like, if there's not, it's an all risk policy. There's no exclusion for gene therapy. We've been covering gene therapy since they first came up. I'm happy to tell you that we cover it, but we never excluded it. And there was such this perception that, oh, you have to go and have them absolutely explicitly say it's covered. It's like, we've always covered it. We covered it from day one.
Yep.
You know?
Is that because some carriers were actually excluding it and then writing it again as a rider or an endorsement on top of it or a carve out?
I think
product?
It was.
Yeah.
I do think that was the nature of maybe some others' behavior, but I was going like, we're never going to do that. If it's the risk to the employer, it's our risk.
Yeah. When you're taking the risk, so why not just price accordingly based on prevalence and severity? And then if that you think 10 gene therapies hit your plan or 5 next year, you price accordingly, and then you just massage that across the risk pool and price for it, right? And then you don't have to exclude it or sell another policy on top of it.
And I do think that's kind of why the industry is kind of looking like a barbell right now, in that you can do that when you got $1 billion or more in gross written premium. And that market that, when we talked about this, is that, the MGU market's always going to be there. They're great people. I don't want to say anything negative about that market. But they've got high service levels. They're going to be smaller blocks of business. And there's just kind of no man's land between $200 million and $1 billion. Just a few carriers in there. That's a hard place to live right now because you don't have the scale of what you have at $1 billion, and you don't have the ability to really be focused and disciplined like you do at the smaller levels.
And that's why I think you said that the MGU space will always be there, because the nimbleness and I would say the niches that they can carve out that they really like, whether it's a geographic niche, a size niche, we do all RBP or, whatever, they can come up and say, this is what we write and this is what we do. And we're just going to swim right here. Yeah. Those are cool. We need those type of things because they're also underwriting the more novel or innovative things, most likely more of the time, because they spend time pricing it appropriately. Yep. When you get very large, there's a point where your job is to be able to underwrite all things, and it may not give you the time or the capacity to go dig into these really nascent solutions that are emerging until they're stable and big enough to be on the radar. And that, I think we both accept that I
agree with you in concept. I will say I have worked really hard on our team to kind of, hey, let's figure out how we figure out the nascent side too. Good. Because we need to. That's where we're really going to learn. And we have a concept of experiments where if somebody's doing something that we think is new and novel, if I go and write a portion of the business just to see how it performs, I'm large enough now where I can take that gamble. And even if it ran a 100% loss ratio, it didn't really impact me overall. So maybe I do run these controlled experiments. We've got several of them running within our operation, and they're just trying to say, hey, does this work or not? Because again, the hard part with underwriting is everybody wants you to have the data so you can price it properly. Yep. Well, if you're doing something brand new, there is no data.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's a guess that it's going to work. So sometimes we got to put the business on the books just to see.
We'll do this, man. And it's not because I want to rush out of here, but I do think we need to land the plane for both of our schedules. Yep. I usually ask 2 questions to finish, Jay. And we've kind of covered, to a degree, future state of healthcare. But if we look perhaps just for a moment outside of just the stop loss lens that we look at things through, broader implications in healthcare in the next couple of years that you're foreseeing happening, right? Whether there's emerging changes in trends in data, or if we're moving more towards single payer or anything like that, like what are you betting or planning for in healthcare at large?
I still don't think single payer is believable at all. I actually think it's the undertones of the last 18 months, or it's actually going to go the opposite of that. Because I think if you look at the entities that could facilitate single payer, it's not there. I really think it's more on medical delivery side. And again, we've seen a lot of innovation, but I do think precision medicine is something that's going to be huge for us all. I do think we are getting to the space where you could say, yeah, I've got a customized cure for you. It's technically what some of the cell and gene therapies are, right? They are customized cures. I think that market is going to continue to grow. It's going to be expensive, but it's also going to be, the fact that we now are not treating disease states, sometimes we're really looking at more curative. If you ask me what the single biggest thing we could do as a nation to impact our healthcare cost, fix our food chain. So I know some people are going to get offended at that, but that's okay. But that, to me, is the single biggest thing we could do as a society. I think there should be, I'm going to use my red, yellow, green analogy. I think every food label should come with a red, yellow, or green based on nutritional value. Yeah. Green has nutritional value, red has none, and the yellow space is the yellow space. I think if we just got to get better about what we put in our bodies, we would be so much better
You
off.
were preaching to the choir here, man. Yeah. I mean, I know we all might have slightly differences opinions of what format or diet protocol or whatever, but the food infrastructure and what we incentivize and subsidize and how we produce food and the chemicals. And, it's a deep rabbit hole to go down that's obviously being talked about in the public sphere. That is the only thing I think that really matters in terms of healthcare is health, the average health of an individual, and then at scale in the country, right? And most of that is food related. Yep. Diet is a big part of it, exercise as well. So I couldn't agree more. Jay, let me give you the final word though, if you don't mind, if you want to take it here. I usually ask for closing thoughts. We've covered a lot of ground. We got deep in the weeds of stop loss. What do you want to leave the audience thinking about?
No, I think the main thing, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come here. And, it's been my pleasure to come and do it. I was excited to do this, and, congratulations on all the success you've had with this. It's really impressive. I can't believe someone's actually made over 200 episodes about the self-insurance industry. If you would have asked me that 10 years ago, I said, no way.
Well, you said you were betting, man. You probably would have bet against that when we started. I'm
sorry. Don't take it offensively, but yes, I would have bet against you. But I think really what I'm here to talk about today was kind of what's going on with our industry, where the future is. We are in a hardening market, and I think part of it is a cycle. I think part of it is we need a little more aggressive risk management in our portfolios. I think that's something that we weren't doing in the past couple of years. And I think that's really how we kind of modulate back to maybe the non-hardening market. I don't want to say we're going to modulate back to the soft market because, again, it ebb and flows. And, how do we kind of sit right there at that Mendoza line in the middle of the peak and the trough? And that's really where we want to be. And I think part of that is just managing claims better, which I'm actually really excited about the future of this business. And again, I'm going to preach to the choir on that again on that. But I think the self-funded industry is going to grow as a complete percentage. And I think employers are looking for solutions. I think they're looking for people who can say, yes, I can manage it better. Yes, I can actually attack some of the issues. We want to see innovation. We want to see new things. We want to see new delivery. Again, stop loss itself, that product is not going to really be that different because it's pretty basic concept, but the risk of what it covers is infinitely complicated, and the solutions that it could take are infinite. So,
well, I'm glad to hear you say that we've got a bright future in this industry. So I won't run off and start a pet insurance company just yet. I think I'll stick it out here in self-funding and captives and stop loss and keep that the name of the game for the show. But Jay, obviously, thank you again, man. I know we've both got schedules to get to and you've travel and whatnot, but I appreciate you making the effort to get down. And it's always actually fun too to find that we have a very close mutual friend in this business as well. I wish I didn't know about it, which means even more I probably like you as a result of that. So Jay, thanks again. And I hope this isn't the last time we sit down.
I hope so. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.